G'day ladies, gentlemen, and everything in between, and welcome to Melbourne Airport. Today I'm going to be flying you from Melbourne to Bali, and we're in a state-of-the-art Airbus A321neo. And while I'm at the controls in the background, I'll be explaining to you in detail why I quit my job as a ramp agent and what to expect if you want to become a ramp agent one day. But get your popcorn, I'm about to reveal it all. This is about to get juicy. So in November of 2024, I decided to join a baggage handling company here in Australia, and I sit here 3 months later having just quit. This video isn't to shit can the companies I've worked for or the industry in general. It's just the honest truth of what I experienced, which I hope can help you decide whether or not this is a job for you, or just give the general public a bit of an insight into what it's like as a ramp agent in Australia. So I've been at the airport for 2 years in total. My first job was a ramp agent with Rex, and I absolutely loved working here. The people, the work, the whole vibe was absolutely fantastic. And management were bearable too, which is something I'm going to go into a bit later on. Now, when Rex faced their financial battles, which we all probably know about, I decided to look elsewhere for something a little bit more secure, as I needed more cash flow at the time to be able to live comfortably. Fast forward some months, I found myself presented with an opportunity to join the company that I just left. And it interested me because they were promising fast growth with many opportunities in the future, which they absolutely did have, and it's what I absolutely wanted. You really can upskill super fast here if that's what you're after. And what I mean by that is you can climb the ranks very quickly, but with that comes a lot more responsibility and sometimes not much more money. Quite early on, I was exposed to the dark sides of this company, with the overall vibe amongst the guys and girls visibly hostile towards upper management. And I could see why they were so hostile towards the management, honestly. But because I was fresh and I just started, I just brushed it aside and got on with my job. It also didn't help that their main client is notorious for their cutthroat attitude. Something I also noticed early on was I wasn't earning enough money despite working sort of 35 to 40 hour weeks. The pay rate that they offered was $26.80 per hour. They had no penalty rates other than Saturday and Sunday rates. Saturday being time and a half, which then brought your rate to $40.20 an hour, and Sunday being just under the double. So you're looking at around $50 an hour. They did give you an allowance if you started before dawn, which equated to something ridiculous like $1 or maybe even less for the whole shift. There's pretty much no overtime as well. So if you pick up a shift on your day off, you're going to get paid the normal rate. Or if they call you and ask you if you want to come in for a shift tomorrow on your day off, it's going to be a normal rate. So obviously that's not very enticing. Whereas at Rex, it was the opposite. If you were rostered off for a certain day and they called you saying, "Jono, do you want to come in?" It would be, your overtime rates for that shift, which was obviously more enticing for the boys and girls to take that shift and in return not be so understaffed. So I probably was comparing this job to the job at Rex, where I did get those extra benefits like shift loading, overtime rates, pre-dawn allowances of around 15% for your whole shift. So what I mean by that is if you started before, I think it was 6 or 7 a.m. at Rex, then they would actually load 15% extra onto your hourly rate for that whole shift. So again, it was a bit more enticing and also a bit more, I guess, rewarding because you're earning more money. And let's be real, at the end of the day, we only go to work really to earn money. I mean, we wouldn't work if we didn't have to. And that's also probably why Rex ran out of money because they were paying us relatively well compared to some other companies in the industry. I think in general, ramp agents are not paid what they're worth. And that's just my opinion. And I understand this day and age, the ramp agents actually getting paid more than they ever have per hourly basis. So I cannot imagine what it used to be like back in the day before I started. It just doesn't make sense to me that an 18-year-old who just learned to drive in the real world can come into the airport, get is airside driver's authority, which essentially is your license to drive on the airfield. It doesn't make sense to me that they can get that license and literally perform pushbacks of aircraft which are worth hundreds of millions of dollars while getting paid $26 per hour. With that responsibility of, passengers on board, the peripherals around you like terminals and gates and other potential hazards that you have to dodge and weave while you're pushing or towing an aircraft. I just feel like $26 per hour for that sort of responsibility doesn't really make sense to me. And it doesn't really make sense to me that management are paid double that of a ramp agent when the ramp agent is arguably one of the most pivotal moving parts of a flight's operation. For example, take the pilots away. Sure, you can't go anywhere, okay? How bad would that be? Now, do the same thing and take the ramp agents away. And what's going to happen? No bags get on that plane. The plane won't be pushed back or towed. There's going to be no freight or cargo loaded on that plane, meaning ultimately the airline's not going to get paid. Not to mention the lavatory servicing, which is the toilet servicing or the water servicing, and the operation of passenger stairs and passenger marshalling to ensure that they can board and deboard safely. I mean, take the ramp agent away, and how bad would that be? I seriously believe if the pay rate of a ramp agent were to improve, then so would the workmanship and the quality of service that they provide. All right, now getting into some juicy stuff. Management. First and foremost, in the defense of the management/resourcing department of the company I just left, they were dealing with an understaffed operation pretty much every single day. Some staff would call in sick and others would flat out just no-show. They don't even turn up to their shift without telling anyone. So obviously this would make their job very difficult, and I do acknowledge that. In saying that, while trying to be as nice as possible, they couldn't organise a route in a brothel. And it was definitely the company's biggest weakness and probably the main cause of everyone's problems, anxiety, and even stress at this job. And one of the main problems I realised very early on working here is the unrealistic expectations that this management have of their workers. For example, this is a situation that happened to me, and I'm gonna get a little diagram on the screen so you guys can see, a visual of what I'm trying to explain. So only a couple of weeks ago, I was rostered on for an international shift. Now the international bays, as you can see on the screen, are usually around this part of the airport, and the domestic bays are on this part of the airport. So they're a little bit separated by, traffic, planes, terminals, speed limits. It can take some time to get from that part of the airport to the other. I was working on an international flight. We had a plane come in, and on that plane, we had freight. So it was my job to offload the bags of this flight, take them to the bag room, and then once all the bags have been offloaded, then attend to the freight that had come off that flight and drive it down to the freight shed and leave it there for the freight guys to organise and do what they will with it. Now, in typical airport fashion, this plane landed maybe 10, 15 minutes late. And it's not really a big issue to many people unless you're meant to be somewhere shortly after that flight to attend to another plane. So that sort of, margin of time or leeway absolutely doesn't exist, because now instead of having that 10 minutes to get from one side of the airport to the other, you've now got 2 or even less. And in that 2 minutes, you now have to set up for the arrival, which means getting all of the equipment for the ground, like your belt loaders, your dollies or your barrows, cones, and all that stuff for the ramp agents to be able to put around the plane once it does arrive. So it just doesn't make sense. It's not physically possible to do that, because you'd have to drive around the airfield to pick up all this stuff at different parts of the airport, unless you get lucky and find all this equipment in the same part of the airport, which is just quite rare, because we're all looking for the same equipment to use on our own respective flights. So I was running freight and I was over this side of the airport. Now, I knew that I had a flight landing in about 2 to 3 minutes on this side of the airport. Now, while I was dropping off the freight, I received 2 phone calls from management However, I couldn't answer the phone because I was literally driving my tug on the airfield. And if you ask anybody who works on the tarmac, they know that you're technically not allowed to be on your phone out there. And if the yellow cars or the airside police see you, they will probably pin you, which then might put you in a situation where you might end up losing your ADA or your airside driver's license, all because you're answering a phone call from management. So I ignored the 2 phone calls. And when I say 2 phone calls, I mean back to back. I looked at my watch and I saw that it was operations and I thought, well, I can't answer. So I kept doing what I was doing. And at this time, I'm just about to drop the freight off. And then I get another phone call and I didn't answer that one either. So a couple of minutes later, I get to the freight area where I drop off the freight and I now have a chance to go on my phone. So I text the operations number and I say this. So somewhat passive aggressive on my end, but very frustrating at the time to be receiving that kind of, I guess, treatment, if that makes sense. Mind you, it's February where I live and it's quite hot. It's our summer. So I needed the water. I needed something to drink before I was going to this other flight because I'd just been outside for about 3 hours in the sun working. So I had to also factor that in, and that's something that they obviously don't factor in or probably care about, to be completely honest. So after I send that text message, I get their reply, and then something unbelievable happens. At this time, I am actually now on my way to this flight that landed a couple of minutes ago. But I just wanted to quickly duck in to this area of the airport, which was on the way, just to get some water. It took about 30 seconds. I go back onto my tug, and it won't turn on. This diesel tug, I believe, had run out of fuel, and because the petrol gauge on the old tug wasn't working, I had no idea how much fuel that I was running when I first got on that tug earlier on in my shift. So now I'm stranded here, where I really need to be over here. So I call our middle management, so not the operations, the one below them, who are usually on our side, I will say. And I say, look, this is what just happened. My tug is broken down. I'm meant to be at a flight, but I don't know if I can get there. And they're all sweet about it. They said, man, that's funny. Like, all good. We'll get someone over there now to come pick you up. Perfect. 2 minutes go by, no one's come. 3 minutes go by, no one's come. 5 minutes go by and nobody's come. And luckily for me, 2 guys ended up coming from my company. They just happened to be driving down that way. So I obviously got a lift back with them, and on the way back, I got another phone call, and this time I answered it. And it was operations being like, Jonathan, where are you? The flight has landed 5 minutes ago, and the boys are struggling because you're not there. And when you're getting this, it's very frustrating because it's like, it's out of my control. I feel like a liar now. Like, you probably think I'm taking the piss. But I'm being honest, this is what's happened. And it's just a series of small, unfortunate events which could have probably been avoided if they were a bit more organised. However, I ended up saying, look, I'm on my way there now, eventually, when I rocked up to it. And that flight got done with no real delays or any problems for that matter. But that was quite frustrating and quite stressful. And I think that situation there was probably the final straw for me in deciding that, this place, I don't think this place is right for me. And maybe it's time to look elsewhere. So that is what I mean by the unrealistic expectations of their workers. Also, many times you would be on shift and you'd see that a much needed break is coming up after a certain flight, and then bam, you'd go to check it again and they'd replace that break, or should I say take that break away from you and replace it with 2 to 3 extra flights, which would then turn into another 2 to 3 hours of work. So that was very, very frustrating because, you've been working tirelessly for sort of 3 to 4 hours and you think, all right, I'm halfway through my shift. I wouldn't mind a half an hour break. And you can see it on your phone with the program they use that updates your schedule for the day. You see that you have a break there and then you go to check it again, or they'll text you and say, check your phone. And you see that they've moved your break and they've given you extra tasks to do. Or even better, you don't even get a break at all. There's been shifts in the past where I never got a break. You'd be working 8 hours straight. Now, people might be like, yeah, but what about the time between flights? Okay, 6 hours straight with maybe 5-10 minutes between flights. I just don't think that's a reasonable break. And I know that you're entitled to a break, no matter what your job is. Or even better, you'd get a break at the start of your shift, and then you'd get pumped for the next 8 hours. So what I mean by that is, say, for example, you start at 12 in the afternoon, you check your phone on the way to work, and you see that your first thing on your tasks for the day is a 40-minute break. That's your break for the whole shift, but I haven't even done anything. I haven't even started. So you just know that after that 40-minute break, you've just got 8 hours straight of work, which it's just horrible. Or if you're lucky enough, you will get your 30-minute break, but you'll check your task after that break and you're actually expected to be at an arrival in 20 minutes, meaning you lose 10 minutes of that 30-minute break because you have to go out there to set up for the arrival. And it's just like, well, why would you give me that flight when I'm on a break? Or why would you give me my break now? Like, why don't you? It's just, there's all these questions, and I understand that I don't know how they do it on their end, but it's like, if you give me a 30-minute break, but then in 20 minutes I need to be somewhere, like, that doesn't math. The math ain't mathing. You know, make that make sense. And in saying this, like I touched on briefly before, there were often times you would have downtime, which was sort of unofficial break times where you just didn't have any flights. So sometimes you actually had the luxury of kind of like 2 hours of downtime, meaning you could just sit on your phone, you can watch TV, go get food, do whatever you want in that time, and you're getting paid for it. But you do have to make sure to keep checking your phone during this time in case the operations text you telling you to go and service a plane. It's nothing worse than seeing that you have a couple of hours of downtime, so you go upstairs, go through security, get your food, get a phone call saying, hey, we need you like in 2 minutes down on this gate. It's like, oh my God. Now at Rex, it was far different due to the much smaller scale of the operation, and the aircraft movements were nowhere near as many. But you would rock up to your shift and your flights for the day would be highlighted. Give or take maybe 1 or 2 in case of delays, early arrivals, etc. But it was just so much easier to follow and so much more organized, I felt, with that sort of system in place. And therefore, I think the workers were pretty quick to learn the schedule, making things run just smoothly. Where I just left, like I said, you get a text asking to be here, and then right after that, you need to be somewhere else. And then on Monday, you'd be asked if you could come in early on the Thursday, and then you'd be mixing and matching international and domestic flights in the same day, again, to make up for the lack of manpower. But it just seemed so disorganized, and that's probably the one thing that you can't have in a service like ground handling, is disorganization. So if you are looking to work as a ramp agent, obviously the hours will be a big thing that impact your lifestyle. Now at Rex, I was working pretty much the same hours, doing less work during the day and being paid better. Where I just left, I was doing the same hours as Rex, doing far more work during the day and being paid worse. And where I'm about to go, I'm doing less hours, being paid way more, and I cannot imagine I'll be working as hard as I was at this previous company. But generally speaking, as a rampy, there was always shifts to pick up if you wanted, and I believe that this was just due to the lack of staff. But even at Rex, where we were probably overstaffed at times, there was still enough hours to go around for everyone. If you do decide after all of that, you still want to become a ramp agent, well, then this is sort of what you can expect to be doing on the daily. So depending on the company that you work for, they kind of break it down into 3 to 6 month periods from what I saw. Now, the first 3 to 6 months, depending on who you work for, you might be in the dreaded bag room, which means you'll be scanning or sticking bag tags to bingo sheets while putting the bags on their respective barrows or inside the cans, and pretty much just making sure that the drivers are loaded up with all their bags so they can take it to the flights in time. I do think it's a great way to learn the process, and as much as some people talk shit about the bag room, it's not that bad. I mean, for example, you're out of the weather, so you've got fans and heaters in there. It's quite comfortable work, and once you know what you're doing, it can get very simple. So once you get out of the bag room, you're going to be met with the ramp. Everyone's dream, and probably the reason that you want to sign up to this job. Now you're going to be in the belly of the plane, loading and unloading bags manually, lifting up to 32 kilos over and over again, trying to fit everyone's overpacked bags in a tight spot, and doing all this in time before you have to push back so that you don't cause any delays. So it can be stressful. It's very physical and quite demanding, but it is something that you can get used to. And if you can somewhat skew the way you think about it, like I used to think of it as like a free workout or a free gym, which you were actually getting paid for, then you can make a bit more fun out of the situation. So after another 3 to 6 months of this grueling journey, you might then become a driver, where it's now your job to keep the rampies busy by loading them up with bags and freight and driving to and from the bag room. You're also going to need to be able to set up the bays for the arrivals by finding all the correct equipment for the rampies to use. Like I mentioned before, belt loaders, barrows, cones, chocks, all that good stuff. Essentially, your responsibility will have escalated quite a lot, but you'll find that your pay most likely hasn't. So you're still getting paid the same amount as old mate in the hold stacking the bags, but your responsibility has definitely increased compared to his. So do keep this in mind. Now, once you've been driving around and showing the company how you roll, the options really are endless where you go from there. And at this time, it can become a real super exciting prospect and a very exciting job. And there is really good money to be made eventually if you do decide to stay strong and stick fat. It's such a weird and funny thing. Like, many people would simply ask, why the would you want this as a job? The headaches, the stress, the shit pay, the weather. And they're very valid questions, but it's a rewarding job and it somehow just sucks you in. I'm very, very grateful for the opportunities I've received these past 2 years as a ramp agent, and I will miss the ramp agent life, but I am also ready to take my next step as an aircraft refueler, which I cannot wait to share with you all. I hope this gave you guys some insight into 2 of the companies that I've worked for in the past couple of years, and maybe something to think about if it is something that you want to do in your career. If you do want to become a ramp agent, I absolutely encourage it, even though there was quite a negative tone around this video. But the aviation industry needs good, hard workers who love their job and are passionate about what they do. And in turn, you're going to get a smoother operation, which really makes more money for the big guys at the end of the day. So next time you meet or see a baggage handler, just think that they're probably on a 12-hour shift on a minimum wage with management f***ing them in the ass, completely raw, with no lube or protection. I'll leave that image in your head. Have a nice day.